myclass 6. I will not execute it. I will show you the code, and as usual you have to draw the diagram. Have a look at that. Yes, I want you to draw the diagram for this program as well. Start. Draw a fresh diagram always. Don't make changes to the existing diagram. Your concept will get clear when you draw fresh diagram every time. Okay, I think it's done. Huh? myclass 6 m1 is equal to new myclass 6, so that will create object on heap. It has got num. $100 m1 refers to that object. m1 dot display 100. m1 dot fun1 m1, once again same thing. myclass 6 ref is equal to m1 internally. That means ref is a reference. Ref is a reference to that object where m1 refers to. That means ref refers to that same object. So 2000 here. Yeah. Now there is one twist in this example, and that twist is ref is equal to new myclass 6 inside method. That means ref was initially referring to that same object where m1 was referring. Now you said new myclass. So new myclass means new object. new myclass 6. Again, as usual, num will be there inside it. 100. And now ref will not refer to that previous object, ref will refer to this new object. So 2000 will go, 4000 will. So ref will refer to this object. Ref will not refer to. That is equal to 200. So this num will be 200. This num will be 200. Now
Sir,
in your diagram, what?
डायग्राम में ref dot num is equal to 200 कहाँ पे आएगा?
ठीक है, यहाँ पे आएगा. Ref is referring to new object, no? So ref dot num is equal to 200. Once fun one is over, you know local variable dies. So ref will die. Ref will be removed. Once ref is removed, this object will be marked for garbage collection. Once fun method is over, you will go to your main function where m1 dot display. What is m1 dot display? It's 100. It's 100. 100, 100. Check that. So let me tell you what is the twist in this code. The twist is here. Rest of the code is same as previous program, previous example. This is one new twist. Clear? Diagram clear? In your diagram, everything should come. Ref was 2000, then you make it 4000. So ref does not refer to this object, cross, ref refers to new object. Once fun1 is over, ref will be destroyed being a local variable. So cross mark on ref. Once ref is destroyed, your class will become unreference, and so it will be marked for garbage collection. And that 200 also, 100 to 200. So everything has to be there in your diagram. So that is my class. Huh?
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, can you explain that why 100 and 100 is coming?
Why?
100 and 100 is coming in output. Why is 200?
Diagram will tell you why 100 and 100 comes. Because both the times we are invoking m1 dot display. And you can see here m1's num has not changed. Ref dot num has changed. After making ref refers to new object, you have said ref dot num is equal to 200. No?
Okay, sir.
So that's what I said. Your diagram will give you answer. ठीक है ना? Followed ना?
Yes, sir.
Now next is constructoring. What happens when you create an object? of a class, or when you yesterday I told you, instantiate a class. Both are same. But instantiating a class is too technical as compared to when you create an object. So what happens when you create an object of a class or when you instantiate a class? Already we know the answer, but that is 50% answer. Incomplete answer. What is that? Member variables or instance members are allocated memory. So all your member variables will be allocated memory except static members, when you create an object. But then who will initialize them? What about initializing those instance members? So in order to initialize instance members, a separate member function is called, that is constructor. Constructor gets called in order to constructor gets called in order to initialize instance members or member variables, instance members. Okay, so this is the complete answer. What happens when you create an object of a class, when you instantiate a class, or when you instantiate a class? Member variables or instance members are allocated memory. This already we have discussed. What is new here? Second, next step is constructor gets called in order to initialize instance members. And this sequence is very, very important. You can't change this sequence. You can't say when object is created, first constructor gets called and then instance members are allocated memory. Common sense. When object is created, instance members are allocated memory first, and then somebody needs to initialize them. So who initializes them? Constructor. So constructor is some function which initializes instance members. So we have a note here, constructor info. Yeah. Constructor is a special member function. Special because it is used to initialize the instance member or members. It has got the same name as of class. So anywhere you can initialize them. It is used to initialize the instance members. It has got the same name as of class. This point is important because, you know, member functions, they have got different names. Student class has got member functions, set name, set age, get age, and so on. But here constructor will have the same name as of class. So class student has got a constructor with the name student. It does not have a return type. Yeah. Why constructor does not have a return type? Because constructor is not expected to return anything. Constructor is expected to initialize instance members. It is not expected to return anything. That's why constructor cannot have any return type. Cannot. There are two types of constructors: default or no arg constructor. Constructor having no arguments is called as default constructor, and if no constructor is defined in the class, compiler by default provides no arg constructor. So default constructor or no arg constructor, constructor with no arguments, and if no constructor is defined in the class. So up till now, whatever examples we have seen in Java, we did not define any constructor explicitly. So what does that mean? That means there was a constructor that was default constructor provided by compiler. So if no constructor is defined in the class, compiler by default provides no arg or default constructor. Parameterized constructor is the one which has got at least one parameter. So if I show you a class, say class A with int num, with set num and set num and get num. Now you can see here class A has got num, set num and get num. And if I ask you, do we have a constructor here? So first of all, as a programmer, I have not defined any constructor. As a programmer, I have not defined any constructor. Since I have not defined any constructor, compiler will provide default constructor to class A. I repeat, since I have not defined constructor as a programmer, compiler will provide default constructor to class A. And how does it look like? It looks like this. Yeah, it looks like this. Now you can see name of the class A, constructor name also A. It is because constructor has got same name as of class. Now this is default constructor. Default or no R constructor. It is provided by compiler since we are not defined. So once again, default or no R constructor is the one which has got no arguments, and if no constructor is defined in the class, compiler by default provides no R constructor. So up till now, whatever examples we have seen, in those examples, we did not define any constructor. So in those examples, compiler provided default constructor. Parameterized constructor we haven't yet seen because that requirement has not yet come. But parameterized constructor is the one which has got at least one argument, one or more. Okay, now in which case no R constructor is required, that you should know, that knowledge you should have. If you don't know that, you can't provide any constructor, or you may have to do trial and error case. If I provide this constructor, will it work? If I provide that constructor, will that work? So it's very important that in which case no R or default constructor is required. Now in the morning, one girl asked me one question, that what is that bracket? So now you will get that answer. In which case no R constructor is required. Whenever you create object, myclass M1, for example, new myclass, open and close bracket. This open and close bracket indicates that this object needs no R constructor or default constructor. So open and close bracket only means no R or default constructor. That means this object will be created and then default constructor will be called. So default constructor is required over here. Or new myclass. Now you know the difference. This is named object and this is anonymous object. But whatever it is, since you are providing just brackets, open and close, that means both these objects, they require default or no R constructor. So make sure when you have such statements in your code, default statement is there in your code. In which case parameterized constructor is required. MyClass M1 is equal to new MyClass 20. While creating object, you pass some data, one or more. So there you need a parameterized constructor which is not provided by compiler, which you have to provide as a programmer. Or I might say new myclass 40. New myclass 40 is also anonymous object, but this time what is the difference? While creating that object, you pass data. So it also requires parameterized constructor. And now finally, what happens when object is created? I told you memory is allocated for instance member or members, and constructor is called which initializes instance member or
Sir, sir, what is then a parameterless constructor then? It is default
parameter. What is what?
parameterless constructor. Is it default constructor only?
Parameter less means default or no R.
Okay.
In Java, we have only two constructors: default or no R constructor and parameterized constructor.
So it is same myclass in CPP.
I can't hear.
So
Speak loudly.
it is same as like in CPP, no? Constructor.
C++ has got three types of constructors: default constructor, parameterized constructor, and copy constructor. Okay, now we have constructor examples. Constructor demo 1, 2, and 3. Constructor demo 1, 2, and 3. First, constructor demo 1. Let's see. Constructor demo 1. Okay, look at that class sample. We have private int num, instance member, setter method, getter method. We haven't defined any constructor. So the concept is, when we don't define any constructor in the class, compiler provides default constructor. So compiler provides default constructor. And we create object sample s1 is equal to new sample, open and close bracket only. That means this statement requires default constructor. This statement requires default constructor. Do we have default constructor in the class? Yes. It is provided by compiler. So that constructor will be called. First of all, num will be allocated memory, and then constructor will be called. And s1 dot set num and s1 dot get. Constructor demo 1. 200. 1.
Sir,
Huh?
can we mention both of the constructors within one class?
Yeah. You can have constructor overloading. Default constructor, constructor with one parameter, constructor with two parameters, three parameters, and so on. Yes. But once again, since you asked this question, a very important thing I would like to tell you all of you, and that is, as you asked, can we define more than one constructor in the class? Yes, but it's not your choice, or it's not that you are programmer, so you think two constructors, so you define two constructor. You think 10 constructor, so you define 10 constructor. It's not like that. It's all depends on client requirement. Client will tell you that I would like to create object without passing any data or with passing some data. So that means client wants two constructors, default and parameters. So you define them. Tomorrow client might come and say, I don't want to create object by passing any value. So that means you have to remove parameters constructor from the class. So it all depends on client requirement.
Sir,
Now in this,
sir, when we create a class and we provide nothing, no constructor, the compiler is giving the default constructor.
Yeah,
so
like
that time, like, is this the reason why the variable, the member variables don't have garbage value in them?
No. Why member variables don't have garbage? Because Java doesn't want to play with garbage things.
No, sir. Here default constructor will be called, na, by the compiler.
Yeah, compiler's default constructor.
So is this the reason the garbage value is not here?
No. Because this concept that when you don't define any constructor, compiler provides constructor is same across all object-oriented programming languages, C++, C#, Java. But in C++, the concept is different. In C++, if instance members are not initialized, they are garbage. So C++ default constructor of compiler does not initialize your member, does not initialize. But Java's default constructor initializes.
Okay.
Okay, so is that clear? There is a
Yes, sir.
default constructor here provided by compiler which gets called. So I repeat here, when you create object, two-step process. One is num will be allocated memory, and two is default constructor will be called, which in this case is provided by compiler.
So I have one confusion, sir.
Bolo.
So actually in the C++, we have three constructor. That is a default constructor, parameter constructor, and parameter with parameter list constructor. Right?
Parameter list.
List construction. List.
Parameter less means default constructor.
Yes, sir.
Parameter less, when you say parameter less means no parameter. No parameters means default constructor.
So if we didn't write the parameter list constructor, so it is same just like as a default constructor.
Just sample open and close bracket that you will see in the next example.
Sir?
And in C++ we have default constructor as well.
So, but if we want to assign the default value for each our member function, member variable, then what to do using the constructor?
Using constructor,
Yes.
that's not allowed. That is allowed only in C++.
Okay.
Default values.
Yes, sir.
That's a concept of default values in C++, which is there only in C++, I guess. I mean, at least in Java it is not there. I'm not very much sure about C#, whether it is there or not, but in Java it is not allowed. So you can't. Constructor demo 2. Yeah. Now this is the way we can define constructor. Look at that. So sample S1 is equal to new sample. This will invoke default constructor. So output of this program is inside default constructor. Now, when compiler provides default constructor, what is the reason to provide default constructor? Maybe we would like to try one thing. We know that num is by default 0. That by default num value 0, we would like to make it non-zero. I mean, num is equal to 10.
Yes, sir. Just like the same as C++.
But C++ may what you can do in this bracket, you can say int num is equal to 10. That is not allowed. That syntax is not allowed. Okay, default arguments bolte usko. Default arguments are not there in Java. So this is the reason we can define default constructor. So in this case, if you don't call setter method, set num, value of num will be 10. If you don't say num is equal to 10, and if you don't call set num, value of num will be 0. Because by default num is initialized to 0. So this is one of the reasons we define default constructor. Three. Look at that. We have default constructor and we have parameterized constructor. Why we need parameterized constructor? Because one way of creating object is this, and the other way of creating object is this. Now, one way of object creation is this, where we create object, we call setter method, then we call getter method. The other way of creating object is we create object and we pass 100 there and there, so that we don't have to call setter method. We don't want to call setter method. We want to create object and pass the value there and there itself. So we do that. But for this, you need parameterized constructor, which will take parameter int num. So what is the advantage of that? Since while creating object you pass 100, you don't call setter method. You can call, but you don't need to call setter method, and you get value 100. So your one step is saved when you have parameterized constructor. And this is also called as constructor overloading, because one constructor without argument, other constructor with argument.
Sir, what if we remove the setter of S1 and directly print like S1 dot get num? Will it give 0?
Remove
Setter.
setter for S1 में मत बोलो. Remove setter, suppose.
Remove setter.
That means we don't call, na? We don't call, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And we say S1 dot get num, it will be 0.
Okay.
Yeah. And here it will be 100.
Okay.
So when you have parameterized constructor, you need not invoke setter method. It's not that when you have parameterized constructor, you need not define setter method. No, setter method is required. Why? Once you create object by passing 100, you might think, oh, 100 is not a value I wanted to pass. I pass 100, abhi kya karu? I want to change it. So you have setter method. But the thing is that when you have parameterized constructor, you don't need to call setter. You don't need to call setter.
For the first time.
Yeah.
So if we run this code with commenting the S1 dot set num is equal to 200, then it will give the error or it will execute.
No. If we run the code by commenting this, na?
Yes.
0.
So can you show this?
Yeah. It's 0.
Yes.
इसमें क्या है? I mean, obviously, when you create object, num is 0, and you are not calling setter method, so it remains 0. Here, at the time of creating object, you are passing 100, so 100 goes to num. So your num of S2 is 100. So when you say get num, 100.
So can we say, sir, each integer value by default value is 0 in object?
Yeah, already we have tried, no? Integer all zeros, float 0.0, character /u 4 zeros, boolean false, and reference type null. We have already checked default values of instance members. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
So we can say that in parameterized constructor, it is a call implicitly, na?
Parameterized constructor?
We can call implicitly, na? Yeah, explicitly.
The constructor is called implicitly only. Constructor is called, all constructors are called implicitly. Which constructor is provided implicitly can be provided, default constructor. But based on what condition? Suppose you have not written any constructor, then compiler will provide default constructor. If you have written any constructor in the class, compiler will not provide default constructor. Call happens implicitly when you say new. Here at the end, I would like to ask you one question.